everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today's video is going to be part one of my July reading rewind. Always a tongue twister. So basically this is a bunch of books that I read in the month of July. And as a whole, I would say it was a good month. I've got a couple, I've got a dud. I've got one that I'm not quite sure how I feel about. And then I've got some really good stuff in between. So let's just dive on in. Now, the first book I finished this month, I have mentioned in a bunch of other videos. So depending on how much of my videos you watch or where you're at in it, this may or may not be a surprise to you, but I finished and I loved Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So this is the first V.E. Schwab book that I have read. It is not going to be the last. I have already picked up Vengeful. I haven't read it yet, but I've already picked it up. And forgive me if you've heard this spiel before, but I went down a dark rabbit hole of podcasts, and Victoria Schwab is one of the people I was listening to. And I completely just became obsessed with her as a writer and as a creator, and was fascinated by her journey and her storytelling and her sort of perspective on everything, and became more and more interested in the books that she writes. And I am not a fantasy reader. I am not typically a YA reader. I am not a middle grade reader. A lot of what she writes is none of what she writes is in my normal wheelhouse. Let me just back it up there. But I was still super curious about it, and I wanted to give her a try because the passion she talked about her books with just completely made me want to read her books. And I am so happy I picked up this book. I loved it. I finished it in just a few sittings, and I was there for it 100%. So Victor and Eli are college roommates, senior year, both doing their thesis. They are both kind of like medical students, and basically they discover that people who suffer near-death experiences and are brought back to life can develop superpowers. And it opens with them sort of making this discovery and figuring out how to sort of create that experience for themselves. And there is no guarantee of sort of what your superpower is going to be, and there is certainly no guarantee of what someone is going to do with the power they get once they have it. And not everyone who winds up in these situations does it on purpose. A lot of people, it has happened to them, and they don't always know why there's a change. They don't know how to cope with it. They don't know how to explain it to people. And it is this extremely fascinating, engrossing, amazing book about the journey of these two guys. So it sort of opens with them in college. We fast forward 10 years when Victor is escaping from jail, and we wind up getting, and he's sort of on a quest to find Eli. And we get sort of like forwards and backwards in timelines. There's other characters who play in it, and it's sort of the battle between these two sort of former friends. And I feel like I read this quote in the video where I got the book, but I'm gonna read it again because it needs to be read. And it's the opening piece, so it's not any kind of spoiler. And it just says, life, the way it really is a battle not between bad and good, but between bad and worse. And it's so true. It is the perfect opening quote for this book. I can't recommend this book enough. If you have any hesitation about being able to get into it, it's less about sort of the fantasy superpower, although that obviously plays a huge element in it, but it's also about this relationship between these two guys and sort of this quest, not of good and evil, but bad and worse. And who you root for, you can completely understand, I would say, where they're both coming from and sort of the mission that they are each on. I did pick a side. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. I will tell you that this has my entire heart. I thought this book was absolutely amazing, and it surprised me in all the best ways possible. The next book I finished, I did a completely separate video on, so I will link that for you to tune into it. And it is Rachel Hollis's Girl Stop Apologizing. And at the time I filmed that video, I had literally just finished listening to the audiobook via Hoopla. And I had told you guys that this was in my Amazon cart and I was going to buy it, and I did. And I have tabbed like all these pages from when I was listening to it. I need to go back through it and start highlighting, and there's so much more I didn't even write down. I'm a big fan of Rachel Hollis. I had done another video on Girls Stop Apologizing, which I listened to last year, and just, I won't go too deep into this other than to say this is a completely different book. This is like, sort of the tagline on this is a shame-free plan for embracing and achieving your goals. So her first book was more about all the lies we tell ourselves, from, you know, about relationships and marriage and motherhood and career and ambition and health and fitness and well-being. And, you know, it's a much different sort of self-help, I would say. And I would also say, if you didn't connect with that book, I would not automatically write this one off, because while it's still obviously the same sort of, you know, like look and feel and voice as Girl Wash Your Face, this comes from a very different angle. And this is very much whether you are trying to change your life or start your novel or make a career change or make a relationship change or save money for vacation or start your company or live your dream, whatever it is. I think there's things that are relatable to it, to whatever sort of, you know, quest you're on. And I love her style. I love her voice. There's so many great takeaways. There's so many things you can implement. I just find her to be so encouraging and empowering, and I love it. And I think this is, I actually, sort of the more distance I get, and I would say that I liked this book more, even though I would consider them both 5-star reads for me. If I had to pick one, I think I would pick this one as the one that I'm really connecting with. But I mentioned this in my other video. It could just be where I'm at in my life. But I just think she does a brilliant job of it. And I think there's just so much great info in here. And she breaks it down, I talked about this, into 3 different sections. The excuses to let go of, behaviors to adopt, and skills to acquire. And again, it's not, you know, like completely unreasonable things. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter where you're at in your life. It doesn't matter where you live. Like, these are all things that you can do. And she will debunk a lot of your excuses, which I love. And it's also, it's not easy, and none of it's easy. And if it was easy, we would all be doing it. But I think there's some real relatable, great takeaways in this book. I also was like downloading some songs that she talked about and highlighting stuff. And I told you I have the Post-it note on my mirror in my bedroom that says "Go All In," which is one of her mantras that she has in here. But I love it. I recommend it. Get the audiobook if you can. Do Hoopla, do it through your library. Like, I'm not saying you have to go out and buy all this stuff, but I would say give this book a go if you need any kind of kick in the butt to get going on whatever it is you need to get going on. The next book I read is Patricia Cornwell's Body of Evidence, and this is number 2 in the Kay Scarpetta series. So again, if you're following me, you know that I am rereading the Kay Scarpetta series from the beginning, and I started this series in the 90s, and I probably got like 60% into it, and at that point, in all fairness, she hadn't written all the books in the series, and I wound up deciding I wanted to start from the beginning, which I did. So I read Postmortem maybe like 2 months ago, which is the first book, and I loved it. And this book I liked but didn't love as much as Postmortem, and I think there were 2 reasons why. I think the first reason is that well, we have a dead body out of the gate. This is, Kay Scarpetta is a medical examiner. She works with Detective Molino, who is a detective, and they solve crimes in Virginia, is where these books are originally taking place. This wasn't as suspenseful to me as the first book was. So this was a little bit more, well, we still had dead bodies and we still had investigation. For me, this was a slower pace, slower burn of a book. So I didn't have that same like compelling need to see what was going to happen next and keep flipping through the chapters. Ultimately, I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed sort of the reveal, like the whodunit, like who the murderer was. Like, I completely was like, okay, that all makes sense and everything. I didn't love an aspect of the climax scene. Like, I thought there was a little bit of convenience in a way to it. But I liked a lot of elements along the way. So not a bad book, definitely important if you want to read the series, read them all, read them in order. I really enjoy, and part of this is I think because I know where the book goes, but I enjoy watching the characters develop over the course of the books. And there are characters that become recurring. I don't know if this was all a plan for her out of the gate, but I like watching their relationships develop. It is set in the 90s. It is very of the 90s. I talked about this about the first book too, whether it is things are being faxed, everyone's smoking everywhere. There's a lot of offensive language and mindsets, but I also think they were reflective of the time, and I think that's her point of putting it in here because it's not shared by everyone. But there's definitely some biases and some just not really likable things that people say, but I think it's also supposed to be that way because it was very there at the time, and Kay Scarpetta is not one of the people who was saying and doing the bad things. I realize I'm being vague, but I don't want to risk kind of giving anything away. But I really liked it. I'm happy to be back in the world. I had started to read this when I was going on my trip last month, and I think part of the other reason why it took me a while to get through it is I didn't really read hardly at all when I was on vacation, and then when I came home I was sort of in a different headspace, so I was a little bit disconnected from the book. So I started it at the beginning of my vacation and I didn't finish it until a few weeks later because I had just put it down and was just doing other stuff. So not a ding on the book, a ding on me and my life and sort of where my head was at, but all in, enjoyed it. The next book I read was an ARC, and it's All the Lovely Pieces by J.M. Winchester. And I got this through NetGalley, so thank you NetGalley for this. And this is a thriller suspense, I would say. And it is a woman named Drew, and she is sort of on the run with her 9-year-old son, trying to escape her husband and trying to prove her innocence about a crime she supposedly maybe committed. So she has been on the run for 10 years, and I don't even know where to begin with this book. I didn't like it. And I was super disappointed because it has so many elements in a book that I would like. So we have 3 different characters, viewpoints that we're seeing. So we're seeing Drew's perspective, we're seeing her son Michael's perspective, and we're seeing this woman Catherine's perspective. And Catherine is the woman who is currently with Drew's husband. And I don't think he's technically her ex yet because she just sort of ran away, so they didn't get divorced. So I love multiple viewpoints. We also get multiple timelines in that we're seeing some flashbacks about what happened. We're trying to put the pieces together. And then Drew is very much an unreliable narrator because she doesn't quite remember what happened the night she left, but she sort of has flashes of things. And I'm keeping it vague because I don't want to give anything away if you're going to read this book. I will also say I read a ton of reviews on Goodreads about this after I finished it, and there's a lot of people who love it. So I really feel like this maybe just was not the book for me. So obviously it's all subjective, but I seem to be in the minority about not liking this book. And I have a lot of questions about it. And sort of when the book opens, Drew is in this particular small town because that's where she's going to be able to get this evidence she needs to sort of clear her name and sort of expose her crappy husband. And he's like this billionaire in Seattle and has a tech company and does all this charity, and like everybody thinks he's just this amazing, perfect guy. And she needs to prove that that's not the case. So I was excited for her to like be on this mission, and there were parts of it that I really was enjoying at the beginning. And I really wanted to know like the question of like, what happened? Like what happened that night? What's the real story? So this question was sort of like propelling me through the book, but like the book started out good for me, but then kind of like took a turn more of that. There's like this new love interest, and I'm not gonna spoil stuff, but I felt like this is great. Like we're gonna see her open up to someone, and she's sort of been on the run for so long, and she's been homeschooling her kid. He's finally in a school, like she's finally making some friends and settling down a little bit. But like some things just felt really rushed. I didn't understand why it took her 10 years to get to this point, because the way she talks, it's like she knew all along this is where what she needed to get was. Like it's not like it took her 10 years to find out that this is where she needed to be, or at least that's the way I read it. The perspective from Michael was just not good. I mean, he just, I hate to hate a kid in a book, but like I hated the kid in the book. So that was not so great. And then I was interested in Catherine's story, and then I was interested in her husband's story, and I'm blanking on his name. Maybe it was Adam. But I would have loved to see a perspective from him, because all we got was Drew's perspective on her husband, and it was 100% just bad. Through and through, he was an awful human being. There was nothing redeeming about him. And it sort of like begged the question of like, why did you fall for him and marry him in the first place? Why were you together? Like there has to be something. And I just feel like any character can't be all good or all bad. Like there have to be shades of gray. There has to be some humanity to them. There has to be something. It's just sort of like, you need to give the bad character, they talk about this in like writing classes, like give them a pet. Give them something that makes them human. Give them something that makes them redeemable. And there was just nothing redeemable about her husband. And maybe that was the case, but like, I just couldn't deal with like pure evil, because it was not like a supernatural ending. Like he's not Darth Vader. Like it wasn't like a supernatural book. So I struggled with that. And then I did struggle with the ending and how it was all wrapped up. Like I didn't believe it. I just didn't. And again, I'm being a brat by putting on like my writer perspective. And this is like the curse. I was listening to Brad Meltzer talk, and he was saying like he can't read thrillers because after 50 pages he's like dissecting them to figure out like what's going to happen and what's not working and all of this stuff. And I feel like I'm always sort of reading a book with a half critical eye open, but you can push the envelope and go over the line as long as you make it believable in your story. And I'm there for it. I will suspend disbelief. I will buy things that you wouldn't normally get in real life. It's totally fine. I have no issue with any of that stuff, but I just didn't believe it in the context of the book, and that's where the problem lies. So unfortunately for me, this was not a win at all. But if it sounds intriguing to you, maybe check out Goodreads. Maybe it's your kind of a book, but like I said, I appear to be in the minority on Goodreads, but it wasn't my kind of book. The next book I read was my kind of book, and it is Dear Wife by Kimberly Bell, and I loved this one. This was domestic suspense thriller. I'm a fan of Kimberly Bell. I read The Marriage Lie last year, and this is her latest book. It just came out, and I listened to the audiobook of it, and I loved it. I really did. And this was multiple perspectives. So here you go. Let's like compare notes here. We have, and this is sheer coincidence because I was not planning to read similar books. It just happened that I wanted to read The Ark before it came out so I could review it. And I was on Hoopla and saw that this book was available, and I just, boom, grabbed it. So Dear Wife is about Beth Murphy, and she is on the run trying to escape her horrible husband. And then we have Sabine Hardison, who is a wife who has gone missing. Her husband Jeff comes home from a business trip and she's not there. And she's like, all her clothes are there, all her stuff is there. Like she's a realtor. She went to, show a house. She told him she would be home late and she never came home. And the police wind up finding her car abandoned in a parking lot of like a shopping center. And then we see Marcus, who is the detective who's assigned to the case. We see his perspective. So this becomes, a question of like, who is Beth? Where's Sabine? What role, if any, does Jeff play in it? Will the detective solve the missing woman case and bring her home? So you've got these multiple perspectives going on. And then I had talked about this in another video too. There is an element of Gone Girl feel to Sabine and Jeff, and not in a bad way, but in that same kind of vibe of like the wife has gone missing, the husband, you know, the husband did it, it's always the husband, and it's, you know, the media attention, it's how he's reacting to things. He is, you know, talking to her sister about things. Sabine's sister is super suspicious of him, and you've got like this family dynamic going on between the two of them. There is a great cast of characters in this, and the audiobook has 3 different narrators, which I love, so you get each person's perspective in a different voice, which I thought was really, really well done. I will say there is something I figured out, which is not to say that it was easy to figure out, and normally I think I have something figured out and I'm wrong, and I normally don't figure things out, but I had a hunch about something and it wound up being right, I should say. So it's not like, a lot of times I'm like, ooh, I know what's happening, and then I'm like, no, that's not actually what's happening. So I had a hunch I was right this time, but it did not diminish the book in any way. It did not take away from the sort of suspense and intrigue of it all. I couldn't wait to listen to it. Like, I was completely invested. I was like, how many chores can I do around the house so I can continue to listen to this audiobook and like justify just listening to this book? But I really enjoyed it. I like Kimberly Bell's writing. I think she does some really great characters. I like her, like the people that she creates, and she does a great job of creating characters who do bad things, but who are redeemable, who have redeemable qualities, who you can not necessarily, I mean, maybe you root for them, maybe you don't, but you understand. You understand why these people are together. You understand why these people have relationships. You understand why these people do what they do. And I think she did it right. Like, she nailed it. She got it. I just thought it was great. I thought it was so good. It was like, I think I said this, it was one of my most anticipated reads of this year, and it did not disappoint me at all. And then the last book I wanted to talk about is Sweet Pea by CJ Scusi. Again, I need to like get it together here. This is a book about a woman named Rhiannon who is kind of a killer. So she is the girl next door. She's got her boyfriend, she's got her dog, she's got her job, and no one is going to suspect that a woman would be this horrible killer in London and the surrounding areas, and she is. This is not a spoiler alert, this is the back of the book. So she makes a kill list. She talks about people she hates, from the guy who's bagging her groceries, to the person bumping her on the train, to her boss, to her colleagues, to her boyfriend, to a whole bunch of other people. And she's just like not to be messed with. So this is pitched as Fleabag meets American Psycho. I talked about this in another video too. I would say Fleabag meets Dexter. I completely get the comparison. There are parts of this I completely loved. There were parts of this that I didn't. I wound up doing like half audiobook, half reading it. I will say I enjoyed a lot of the audiobook because I felt like it gave me a better sense of the character and had a good voice in my head, and like the pace of it. She's supposed to be unlikable. She's a murderer, and I have no issue with that. But there were parts of the book where I just was like, I wasn't finding it as funny, and maybe I was like missing the joke and not getting the humor. But then there were other parts I thought were hysterical, and her one-liners, although completely awful, are completely great. She obviously does some pretty crappy things. And yeah, I just don't know. So I really thought I was gonna 100% love this book. Like, I thought this was gonna be a 5-star, knock it out of the ballpark kind of a book for me. And it wasn't. And I feel like I'm like more disappointed in that. So it wasn't a bad book by any sense. And there is a sequel to it, which I think I'm not gonna rush out to get it. And I actually almost bought it just because I had heard such great things about this book. But I just didn't connect with it the way that I thought I was going to connect with it. So like, I liked it, I didn't love it. I liked the ending of it. I do like a lot of the characters that are in it, and I do like how she sort of like messed with some people and some of the things that she did. Not necessarily like the murdering kind or the murdering part, but it was a good book, but it just wasn't. I think like I'm like sad about the fact that I didn't fall in love with this completely. And you guys have heard me talk about this. Like, I fell in love with Fleabag completely. like obsessed with that book, and I thought I was gonna get like that same feeling from this, and I just don't. So this is not a book that's gonna be for everyone. Also, this is, murder aside, this is pretty crass and crude. The language is probably going to offend a lot of people. It doesn't offend me, but I can see where it'll offend some people. There's like, you know, just a lot of graphic crap going on in here, whether it's the violence or sex or something like that, which is not going to be for everybody either. So I would say this is not your, like, this is not your mama's drama kind of a book, just like Fleabag is not. So I would say, if you're interested, give it a go. Check out the audiobook. You know, you can get it that way too. And I'd be curious what other people think of it. I know some people love this book completely. And then I actually had one of my subscribers who was like, let me save you and tell you not to read this book at all because it's awful. So I didn't think it was awful. I also didn't think it was 5 stars. I'm like somewhere in the middle of it all. And I also feel like I'm still processing it and I haven't quite settled because I keep changing my mind about it. But my gut reaction is, it's like a B on my list of books, like A, B, C, D, F kind of a thing, B. So that is the sneak peek of the first bunch of books that I read in the month of July. I would love to know if you guys have read any of these, what you think about them, if you agree, disagree, other thoughts. You know, I love having all those chit-chatty stuff down below. And also let me know what your, not that I want anyone to have like a disappointing book of the month, but like if anybody else read a book that was sort of disappointing to you, either in that you had high expectations and it didn't meet them, or it just was a book you didn't get on with, let me know what that was, because I'd like to feel like I'm not alone in that camp. So thank you guys for watching as always, and I will see you next time around. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.